Before Barney was a guardian, he was a king. A golden Labrador retriever with a coat of brilliant honey and eyes the color of amber, he reigned supreme over a world of soft sofas, squeaky toys, and the unconditional adoration of his humans, the Millers. He was the center of their universe, a golden sun around which the life of the house revolved. And then the universe expanded. Lily arrived, a small, fragile, and silent creature who didn't play fetch and whose sharp cries seemed to shatter the peace of Barney's kingdom. At first, he watched her with a cautious curiosity, a deposed king studying the new sovereign. But Lily was no ordinary sovereign. She lived in a different world, a world of overwhelming sensations, where the hum of the refrigerator could be a roar and the late afternoon sun an assault. A world where words were indecipherable puzzles. And it was in this silent world that Barney found his new purpose. He realized that when the world became too much for Lily, when she would shrink into herself, hands over her ears, her body trembling with the overload, the calm, warm weight of his head on her lap was the only thing that brought her back. He became her anchor, a golden safe harbor in an ocean of sensory chaos. This is not just the story of a girl and her dog. It is the story of an anchor and its soul, and of what happens when the world, in its blind ignorance, tries to sever the rope that binds them. Lily's 8th summer was not measured in weeks or months, but in a currency of golden moments, each one minted by the unwavering presence of Barney. The mornings began not with the intrusive buzz of an alarm clock, but with the soft, rhythmic thump of Barney's tail against the hardwood floor beside Lily's bed. It was a gentle, persistent metronome of pure joy, a sound that promised safety before her eyes even opened. He was the first thing she saw upon waking, a mountain of honey-colored fur and amber eyes filled with a soft, questioning adoration, and the last thing she felt before sleep, his 200-pound body a warm, breathing bulwark against the formless fears of the night. He was more than a dog. He was a ritual, a living, breathing piece of her carefully ordered world. The backyard was their cathedral. While other children's summers were a cacophony of scraped knees and shouting games, Lily's was a silent, sacred communion. Her parents, Sarah and Tom, would watch from the kitchen window, their hearts a mixture of awe and a gentle, persistent ache. They saw their daughter, a girl who struggled to look them in the eye, sit for hours in the grass, her small fingers meticulously tracing the whorls of fur on Barney's back. They saw her press her ear against his side, as if listening to a secret language in the steady rhythm of his heart. Barney, in turn, would lie beside her with the profound stillness of an ancient statue, a golden lion at rest. He seemed to understand, in a way no human could, that his calm was her medicine. He was a living, breathing, weighted blanket, a dam against the overwhelming flood of the outside world. For Sarah and Tom, watching them was like witnessing a miracle they couldn't quite comprehend, a silent conversation they were not privy to, but for which they were eternally grateful. On that August afternoon, the world was drowsy and golden. The sun, low in the sky, filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree, painting shifting mosaics of light on the lawn. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and the lazy drone of cicadas. Lily was sitting near the weathered wooden fence that separated their perfect suburban yard from the gritty reality of the back alley. She was lining up a row of smooth gray stones, a task of immense importance in her private world. Barney, having fulfilled his duty of morning patrol and afternoon nap, was dozing a few feet away, his paws twitching as he chased dream rabbits. It was a portrait of absolute peace, a moment so perfect it was fragile, like a soap bubble shimmering in the sun. It was then that the bubble burst. A sound from the alley, a clatter of a tipped-over trash can drew Lily's attention. A new figure appeared on the other side of the fence, a stray dog, a skeletal mix of matted fur, ribs showing like a xylophone, its eyes wide with the wild, desperate fear of an animal that had only ever known cruelty. Moved by a compassion so pure it was devoid of caution, Lily saw no danger. She saw only a creature that was hurting. Slowly, deliberately, she stood up, her collection of stones forgotten. She walked to the fence and in a profound innocence reached her small hand over the top, an offering of friendship to a world that had taught this dog that an outstretched hand was only ever a prelude to pain. The stray, cornered and terrified, reacted with the only defense it had ever known. It lunged, a flash of desperate teeth, and a sharp cry cut through the thick summer air. It was not a cry of agony, but of pure, unadulterated shock. The world had, for the first time, hurt her. Before the sound had even finished echoing, Barney exploded. He went from a deep, dreaming sleep to a protective, primal fury in the space of a single heartbeat. The golden lion had awoken. With a guttural roar that seemed to vibrate from the very core of the earth, he launched himself not at Lily, but at the fence, a blur of golden fur and righteous anger. He hit the wooden slats with the force of a battering ram, his thunderous barks a declaration of war against the thing that had harmed his girl. He didn't need to touch the other dog. The sheer, terrifying force of his loyalty, the promise of violence in his voice was enough. The stray yelped, a sound of pure terror, and vanished back into the alley from which it came. Barney stood there for a long moment, his body rigid, his fur bristling, a low growl still rumbling in his chest. He scanned the empty alley, ensuring the threat was truly gone. Only then did he turn, his fury instantly melting away, his amber eyes soft with concern as he padded toward the crying girl behind him. He had done his job. He had been the guardian. He had saved his soul. And in his simple, loyal canine mind, he could never have imagined that this perfect act of heroism was about to be twisted into his most unforgivable crime. The sound of Lily's cry, followed by Barney's ferocious roar, was a combination that Sarah and Tom had never heard before. It was a sound that bypassed thought and went straight to a primal parental terror. Sarah, who was in the kitchen, dropped a glass, its shattering on the tile floor a second, sharper echo of the piece being broken. Tom, in his garage workshop, felt a cold dread wash over him. They burst out of their respective doors and converged on the backyard, their hearts pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against their ribs. What they saw in that split second would be burned into their memories, a horrifying tableau interpreted through the lens of pure fear. They saw their daughter, their precious, fragile Lily, crumpled on the grass, her small body shaking with sobs. They saw the blood, a shocking, vivid crimson welling up from a wound on her forearm, and they saw Barney. Not the gentle, goofy Barney they knew, but a creature they didn't recognize. He was standing over Lily, his body still rigid with adrenaline, the fur on his back raised like a warrior's crest. A low, guttural growl was still rumbling in his chest, his lips curled back slightly, revealing a flash of white teeth. He was facing away from Lily, towards the fence, but from their angle it looked as if he were a wolf standing over his prey. Their brains, flooded with adrenaline and a desperate need to make sense of the scene, connected the dots in the most logical and most terribly wrong way possible. The crying child, the blood, the growling dog. The equation seemed horrifyingly simple. "Barney!" Tom's voice was a sharp, incredulous crack of thunder. It was a command, a question, and an accusation all in one. At the sound of his name, spoken with a tone he had never heard, Barney's tense posture instantly dissolved. He turned, his tail giving a single uncertain wag, his amber eyes filled with confusion. His canine mind couldn't comprehend the shift. He had saved his girl. He was the hero. Why was his alpha, his beloved Tom, looking at him with such horror? He took a step towards them, intending to offer comfort, to show them that the danger was gone. Get back! Stay!" Sarah screamed, her voice shrill with terror that cut Barney to the quick. She ran to Lily, scooping her up into her arms, shielding her body as if the dog were a coiled snake. Lily, overwhelmed by the chaos, the pain, and now her mother's panic, began to wail, a sound of pure sensory overload. Tom moved to stand between his family and the dog, his arms outstretched, creating a human wall. "What did you do?" his voice whispered, trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "Oh God, Barney, what did you do?" Barney froze, his entire world tilting on its axis. The looks on their faces, the scent of their fear, it was all wrong. He whined, a low, questioning sound, his head cocked. He looked at the crying child and the terrified faces of his humans, his simple, loyal heart unable to process the narrative that was being written. He tried to communicate the only way he knew how. He sat, a gesture of submission, and looked at Lily, his tail thumping once, twice on the grass. "I protected her. She is safe. The danger is gone." But his silent language was lost in the storm of their human emotion. They didn't see a hero reporting to duty. They saw a predator, inexplicably turned on the one person he was supposed to love most. They looked at their daughter, who couldn't speak, who couldn't tell them what happened, who couldn't defend her furry guardian. And in that terrible, deafening silence, with only the evidence of their eyes and their worst fears to guide them, they passed their verdict. Barney, their king, their son, their golden boy, was guilty. The hours that followed were a blur of antiseptic-smelling rooms and hushed, serious voices. Lily's wound, a series of deep punctures, was cleaned and bandaged at an urgent care clinic. The doctor, a kind woman with tired eyes, asked the requisite questions. Was the dog vaccinated? Has he ever shown aggression before? Each question was a small, sharp stone added to the mountain of guilt and confusion crushing Sarah and Tom. They answered in monosyllables, their shame a thick, suffocating blanket. They didn't mention the stray. In their minds, the facts were set. Their dog had bitten their child. The why was a terrifying mystery, but the what seemed undeniable. They returned home to a house that felt alien and unsafe. The silence was the most jarring part. Barney, who would normally greet them at the door with a frenzy of joyful wags and happy whines, was nowhere to be seen. Tom had locked him in the laundry room before they left, a temporary measure that now felt like a permanent demarcation. The heart of the home had been quarantined. That night, after a medicated and restless Lily was finally asleep, Sarah and Tom sat at their kitchen table, the same table where they had planned their lives, now the site of a grim war council. The air was heavy with unspoken words, with the ghost of the dog sleeping just one room away. "We can't keep him," Sarah said finally, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, a defense against the wave of grief that threatened to drown her. "Tom, he bit her. He bit Lily. What if it happens again? What if next time it's her face? We can't risk it. We just can't." Tom ran his hands through his hair, his face a mask of agony. "But it's Barney," he argued, his voice cracking. He wouldn't hurt a fly. You know him, Sarah. There has to be something we're not seeing. Something must have provoked him." "She was sitting in the grass." Sarah's voice rose, cracking with hysteria. "What could she have possibly done to provoke him? He's an animal, Tom, a big, powerful animal, and we were fools to forget it. We were so wrapped up in our perfect little story of the girl and her gentle giant that we forgot what he was capable of." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and final. Animal. The conversation devolved into a series of heartbreaking, impossible options. A shelter? Unthinkable. He was a family member. But what was the alternative? The word euthanasia was whispered once, a venomous, terrible sound that made them both flinch as if struck. They couldn't. They loved him too much. He was their first baby, the furry, goofy creature who had licked the tears from Sarah's face after her first miscarriage, the one who had taught Tom the meaning of unconditional love. To kill him for a crime they didn't fully understand felt like a betrayal of their own souls. And so, trapped between a risk they couldn't take and a finality they couldn't bear, they landed on a third option, a compromise born of fear and a lingering, despairing love. It was a solution that would keep Lily safe while allowing Barney to live. It was a solution that felt practical, logical, and in its cold execution, more cruel than any other. "We'll build a run," Tom said, his voice hollow, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "A large one in the back of the yard, a kennel. He'll have shelter, food, water. He'll be safe, and so will she." Sarah nodded, tears finally streaming down her face. It was a prison sentence, an exile. They would banish their king to the furthest corner of his own kingdom. Barney, the dog who lived for the soft carpets, the warm laps, the very air his family breathed, would now live his life on dirt and concrete, separated from them by a wall of chain-link fence. It was a decision that saved his life, but in doing so, it sentenced him to a living death, and in their hearts they knew it. The king was being dethroned, and the silence that would follow would be his crown of thorns. The construction of the kennel was a swift, brutal affair. Tom worked with a grim, silent efficiency, the sounds of his hammer and saw echoing through the neighborhood like the tolling of a funeral bell. Each post driven into the ground was a nail in the coffin of their old life. When it was finished, it stood in the back corner of the yard, a cold, geometric scar on the once perfect lawn. It was large, clean, and utterly soulless. The day they moved Barney was the day the color drained from their world. Tom clipped the leash onto the collar of a confused and tentatively happy dog who believed he was finally being freed from the laundry room for a walk. His tail wagged, his body wiggled with anticipation. But the walk was short. It ended at the gate of the chain-link fence. Tom unclipped the leash, gave Barney one last desperate hug, his face buried in the dog's familiar-smelling fur, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, boy." Then he closed the gate, the metallic click of the latch sealing Barney's fate. Barney watched him walk away, his amber eyes wide with a confusion that slowly, over the course of hours, curdled into the heartbreaking understanding of abandonment. He was a king locked out of his own castle. Life settled into a new, agonizing rhythm. Barney's world shrank to the 10 by 20-foot patch of dirt and concrete. He would spend his days pacing the fence line, his paws tracing a muddy, repetitive path, his eyes fixed on the back door of the house, waiting for a call that never came. He could hear the familiar sounds of his family, the distant murmur of the television, the laughter, the clatter of dishes, each sound a ghostly torment, a reminder of the paradise he had lost. He would often stop eating, lying with his head on his paws, a deep, mournful sigh escaping his chest. The vibrant, golden sun of their universe was slowly, heartbreakingly extinguishing himself. Inside the house, a different but equally profound suffering was unfolding. Lily, without her anchor, was adrift in a violent sensory sea. The world which Barney's calm presence had held at bay now rushed in from all sides. The hum of the refrigerator was a physical blow. The texture of her clothes was sandpaper against her skin. Her meltdowns, once rare and manageable, became frequent and terrifying. She would collapse into herself, rocking back and forth, her small hands balled into fists, emitting a low, keening wail of pure distress. Her parents tried everything. They bought her a weighted blanket, noise-canceling headphones, a dozen different sensory toys. But nothing could replicate the living, breathing, intuitive comfort of Barney. Nothing could replicate the feel of his warm fur, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the gentle weight of his head on her lap. Lily couldn't use words to ask for him, but her entire being screamed his absence. She would stand at the back window, her small hand pressed against the glass, and watch the lonely golden shape pacing in the distance. Her parents, seeing this, would gently lead her away,
their hearts breaking, believing they were protecting her from the monster, not realizing they were keeping her from her only medicine. The two sufferers were separated by 100 feet of green grass, but they might as well have been on different planets. Barney, the guardian, was imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, his heart breaking from loneliness. Lily, the protected, was imprisoned in the chaos of her own mind, her heart breaking from the loss of her only protector. They were two halves of a single soul, torn apart by a terrible mistake, each suffering a silent, profound grief that the other, in their own way, was the only one equipped to understand.
Months bled into a long, gray season of grief. The house, once filled with a quiet joy, now operated under a constant low-level hum of tension and sorrow. Sarah and Tom were ghosts in their own home, their conversations strained, their smiles fragile. They were consumed by a double-edged guilt, the guilt of what Barney had supposedly done and the guilt of seeing their daughter's condition worsen so dramatically after his exile. They were trying to hold their family together, but it felt like trying to cup water in their hands, the essential parts slipping through their fingers no matter how tightly they held on. In a desperate attempt to reclaim a sliver of their old life, to find a moment of normalcy, they decided on a family outing. It was a Saturday in late autumn, the air crisp and smelling of damp earth. They chose a large state park a few miles from their home, a place with sprawling lawns, a playground, and winding trails that disappeared into a dense, ancient forest. They thought the open space, the fresh air, might soothe Lily's frayed senses. The outing began with a fragile, hopeful peace. Lily, holding both her parents' hands, seemed calmer than she had been in weeks. She watched the leaves fall, her eyes tracking their spiraling descent with a rare, focused attention. They found a secluded picnic table, and for a fleeting hour, it almost felt like they were a normal family again. But the peace was an illusion, a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold lake. As the afternoon wore on, the park grew more crowded. The sounds of other families, shouting children, barking dogs, distant music, began to build. For Lily, it was like the slow turning of a volume knob, the sensory input rising from a manageable hum to a deafening roar. Sarah and Tom saw the signs they had come to know so well. Her hands began to clench, her body grew rigid, and a low, distressed hum started in her throat. "Okay, I think that's enough for today," Tom said softly, already gathering their things. "Let's get you home, sweetie." They were packing up, their attention divided for a fatal handful of seconds. Tom was folding the blanket, his back to them. Sarah was putting the last of the food into the basket. It was in that momentary lapse, that sliver of distraction that all parents know, that it happened. Lily, overwhelmed and seeking an escape from the noise, saw the quiet, beckoning darkness of the forest trail just a few yards away. It promised silence. It promised peace. And without a sound, she let go of the picnic table and walked towards it. "Ready to go, Lilybug?" Sarah said, turning around, a smile on her face. The smile froze, then shattered. The space where Lily had been standing was empty. "Tom?" Sarah's voice was a sharp, rising note of panic. "Tom, where's Lily?" Tom spun around. His eyes scanned the playground, the open field. Nothing. A cold, metallic dread flooded his veins. "Lily!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Lily!" His call was swallowed by the indifferent sounds of the park. They ran, their hearts hammering, their calls growing more frantic. They checked the swings, the bathrooms, behind every tree. But she was gone. She had been swallowed whole in the silence she so desperately craved, disappearing into the deep, dark woods that bordered the edge of their fragile, man-made world. The quiet child, the girl who never made a sound, had vanished without a trace. The first hour was a blur of pure, adrenaline-fueled panic. Tom and Sarah ran along the edge of the woods, their voices raw from shouting Lily's name, each syllable swallowed by the dense, indifferent trees. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of false hope through them. They plunged into the trailhead she must have taken, the world instantly growing darker, the air colder. The cheerful sounds of the park faded behind them, replaced by an unnerving, ancient silence. The forest floor was a confusing tapestry of fallen leaves, and every shadow seemed to mock them, twisting into the shape of a small, lost girl. Soon, they were no longer alone. The park rangers arrived first, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to Tom and Sarah's unraveling terror. Then came the police, their cars a flashing, intrusive beacon of red and blue against the natural greens and browns. A command post was established near the picnic area, a small island of grim efficiency in an ocean of chaos. The search was no longer a frantic parental scramble. It was a coordinated, systematic operation. A grid was drawn on a map. Teams of volunteers, local hikers who knew the trails began to assemble, their faces etched with a somber, shared purpose. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and orange, the true horror of the situation began to set in. The forest, which had been merely disorienting in the daylight, was transforming into a place of primal fear. The temperature dropped. The shadows deepened, merging into a single impenetrable wall of darkness. The search teams switched on powerful flashlights, their beams cutting sharp, lonely cones through the gloom, making the surrounding darkness feel even more vast and absolute. Sarah was becoming catatonic, her body shaking with a violent, uncontrollable tremor. A kind-faced female officer wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders. "You need to go home, ma'am," she said gently. "We have your number. We'll call you the second we find her. Your husband can stay." Tom, his face a pale, haggard mask, nodded in agreement. "Go, Sarah, please. I'll stay. I'm not leaving this mountain until I have her." The drive home was a surreal nightmare for Sarah. She drove on autopilot, her mind a chaotic slideshow of horrible possibilities. Every headlight in her rearview mirror was a police car coming to deliver the worst news. When she pulled into her own driveway, the familiar sight of her house offered no comfort. It felt like a hollow, empty shell, the place where Lily was supposed to be safe. She walked through the silent house to the back door and stared out into the yard. And it was then that she heard it. A sound that cut through the fog of her shock. From the kettle in the far corner of the yard came a frantic, desperate barking. It wasn't Barney's usual bark. It was a sound she had never heard before, a high-pitched, urgent, almost hysterical series of yelps and cries. He was throwing himself against the chain-link fence, his eyes gleaming in the faint security light, fixed not on her, but on the dark, distant line of the woods beyond their neighborhood. He could smell it in the air, the scent of his girl, mixed with the scent of fear and of being lost. He knew, in a way no human could, he knew his Lily was in danger, and he was going mad in his cage, a king imprisoned while his kingdom was under siege. Sarah stood at the back door, a ghost in her own home, the world outside a muted, distant reality. The frantic barking from the kennel was the only thing that felt real, a sharp, insistent anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. She watched Barney, a golden blur of motion under the cold security light. He wasn't just barking, he was communicating, his entire body a vessel of desperate, urgent language. He would throw himself against the fence, then run to the side of the kennel that faced the distant woods, then back to the gate, his eyes locking with hers across the dark expanse of the yard. It was a plea, an accusation, and a report, all in one. "She's out there. Our girl is out there, and you have locked me in here." Her first reaction was a wave of exhausted irritation. "Hush, Barney, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not now, I can't." She didn't have the strength to deal with a noisy dog on top of everything else. She turned to go back inside, to sink into the suffocating quiet of the empty house. But she couldn't. The sound of his barking held her in place. It was changing, modulating. The frantic yelps were interspersed with deep, mournful howls, a sound of profound, shared grief that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. It was the sound of her own heart given a voice. He wasn't just being a dog, he was grieving with her. He was feeling what she was feeling. Slowly, as if in a trance, she walked out onto the cold, damp grass. The air was chilly, and she wrapped her arms around herself, never taking her eyes off the frantic dog. Her logical mind, the part of her that had condemned him, was screaming that this was insane. He was the reason they were in this mess. He was the danger. He was the risk. But another part of her, a deeper, more ancient part, the mother's instinct, was telling a different story. It reminded her of the years she had watched him with Lily, the way he seemed to know before anyone else when a meltdown was coming, the way he would physically place his body between Lily and a situation he seemed to sense was too overwhelming for her. He had always been her guardian, her protector. What if they had been wrong? What if that day, that terrible, bloody day, they had seen only fraction of the story? The question, once it took root, was impossible to ignore. It bloomed in the darkness of her despair, a single, fragile flower of impossible hope. She stood before the kennel gate, her hand hovering over the cold metal latch. The police were out there, the volunteers were out there, the experts, and they had maps and grids and technology, and they had found nothing. What was left? Only this, a desperate, illogical, insane gamble on the one thing she hadn't trusted, the love of a dog for her girl. Her hand trembled as she fumbled with the latch. It felt heavy, rusted with her own guilt and fear. For months, this latch had been a symbol of safety, of protecting her daughter from the dog. Now she was opening it in a desperate prayer that he might be the only one who could protect her for them. The latch clicked open. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet of the night. Barney fell silent instantly. He stood in the open gateway, his body quivering, his amber eyes locked on hers. He didn't bolt. He waited, as if for a command, for permission. "Find her," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Find Lily. Bring her home." It was all he needed. He gave her one last look, a look of profound, grateful understanding, and then he was gone. He didn't run aimlessly. He shot across the yard like a golden arrow fired from a bow, his paws barely seeming to touch the ground. He vaulted the low fence at the back of their property and disappeared into the darkness of the neighborhood, a silent, determined missile aimed directly at the heart of the forest where his girl was lost. Sarah stood alone in the empty yard, the open kennel gate a testament to her final, desperate act of faith. The moment his paws hit the ground outside his prison, Barney was no longer a pet. He was an ancient force, a creature of pure, undiluted purpose. The months of lethargy, of sad, listless pacing fell away from him like a shed skin. His muscles, coiled tight with a grief and frustration he couldn't express, now bunched and released in a symphony of powerful, efficient motion. He was a predator, but he was not hunting for food. He was hunting for a piece of his own soul. He moved through the sleeping suburban streets with a silent, ghostly speed. He was a river of gold flowing through a landscape of gray concrete and dark, manicured lawns. His mind was a maelstrom of sensory information, but he was not overwhelmed. He was processing, filtering, discarding everything that was not her. The scent of a raccoon in a trash can, the lingering trail of a neighborhood cat, the smell of rain on asphalt, it was all just noise. He was searching for a single specific note in a cacophony of smells, the scent of Lily. His nose was to the ground, his powerful lungs drawing in the night air in great searching drafts. He could taste the world, dissecting it molecule by molecule. He found the trail of the miller's car, the scent of the tires, the faint lingering smell of his family. He followed it, his pace relentless. He ran past the darkened houses, his claws clicking a soft, urgent rhythm on the pavement, a four-legged prayer for speed. When he reached the entrance to the state park, the scent became a roar. The air was thick with the smell of strangers, the police, the volunteers, a confusing, chaotic wall of human anxiety and sweat. But underneath it all, faint and delicate, was the thread he was looking for: Lily. Her scent was mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of her own fear. It was a scent that made the fur on Barney's back stand on end. He ignored the command post, the flashing lights, the shouting men. He was a guided missile, and his guidance system was a bond forged over 8 years of silent love. He found the trailhead, the exact spot where she had been swallowed by the woods. The scent was stronger here, a clear, heartbreaking path leading into the darkness. He plunged into the forest. The world under the trees was a different planet. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the smell of decaying leaves, of wet earth, of ancient living wood. For any other dog, it would have been a paradise of distractions, but for Barney, it was a cathedral of focus. His nose, a miracle of biological engineering, sifted through the complex layers of scent. He could smell the path of a deer that had passed an hour ago, the nest of a field mouse, the sap of a wounded tree, and woven through it all, like a golden thread in a dark tapestry, was the trail of his girl. He moved with a speed and agility that belied his size, his powerful body weaving through the undergrowth, leaping over fallen logs. He was not just following a scent, he was reading a story. He could smell where she had stopped, where she had stumbled. He could smell the moment her fear had intensified, a sharp, acidic spike in her scent trail. He was not just tracking her location, he was tracking her emotional journey. He was feeling what she had felt hours later, and it spurred him on, his great heart pounding with a love so fierce it was a physical pain in his chest. He was a golden arrow, fired by a mother's desperate hope, flying true and straight through the heart of the darkest night. The scent trail grew stronger, fresher. Barney knew he was close. The sharp, acidic tang of Lily's terror was now overlaid with a new scent, the salty, heartbreaking smell of her tears soaked into the damp earth where she had fallen. He pushed through a thicket of ferns, his body heedless of the branches that whipped at his face, and then he stopped. There she was. She was huddled at the base of an enormous ancient oak tree, its gnarled roots forming a shallow cave around her. She had wedged herself into the space, her small body curled into a tight, protective ball, her face buried in her knees. She was not crying anymore. She was utterly still, a small, lost statue in the vast, dark cathedral of the woods. Her thin jacket was soaked with dew, and her body was trembling, not from fear, but from the deep, penetrating cold of the autumn night. Barney did not bark. He did not rush forward. The same primal instinct that had sent him on this frantic hunt now filled him with an infinite, gentle patience. He knew that any sudden movement, any loud noise would only terrify her more. He approached slowly, his body low to the ground, his tail giving a slow, almost imperceptible wag. He made a soft sound in his throat, a low, gentle woof that was less a bark and more a question. "It's me. Are you okay?" At the sound, Lily's head shot up. Her face was pale in the faint moonlight that filtered through the canopy, her eyes wide and vacant with exhaustion and fear. For a moment, she just stared, her mind overloaded and shut down, struggling to process the golden apparition that had emerged from the darkness. Barney took another slow step forward. He whined softly, a sound of pure, empathetic love. And that was the key. That was the sound that unlocked her. It was the sound of home. Barney? The name was a tiny, fragile puff of air, the first word she had spoken in hours. He crept closer and did what he had always done.
He became her anchor. He carefully, gently nudged his large head under her arm and onto her lap. Then he curled his massive, warm body around her small, shivering frame, enveloping her in a cocoon of fur and body heat. He was a living, breathing furnace, a bulwark against the cold and the darkness. Lily's rigid, terrified posture dissolved. A great, shuddering sob escaped her, and she threw her arms around his thick neck, burying her face in his fur. She wasn't just hugging a dog, she was hugging her safety, her comfort, her home. The dam of her fear and confusion broke, and she cried, her small body shaking with the force of her release. Barney just lay there, absorbing her grief, his presence a solid, unwavering promise. I am here. You are not alone. I will not leave you. He licked the tears from her face, his rough tongue a familiar, comforting texture. He had found her, but his mission was not complete. He could not carry her, and he would not leave her. He lifted his head, pointed his muzzle towards the sky, and let out a single, powerful, resonant bark. It was not a sound of aggression or of fear. It was a sound of triumph and of guidance. It was a beacon, a clear, ringing signal sent out into the night, announcing to the world, she is here, she is safe, I have found our girl.
Barney's bark echoed through the silent forest, a sound of pure, ringing clarity. Miles away, Tom and the weary search party heard it. It was different from the random barks of neighborhood dogs. It was sustained, directional, and filled with an unmistakable purpose. That way, Tom shouted, his voice hoarse, a surge of adrenaline cutting through his exhaustion. It's him! It's Barney! The team, guided by the sound, changed direction, crashing through the undergrowth with a renewed sense of urgency. They followed the barks, a lifeline of sound in the oppressive darkness. As they drew closer, they saw it, a faint, warm glow. It was Barney, his golden fur seeming to generate its own light in the gloom, curled protectively around the small, shivering form of Lily. She was awake, her arms wrapped around his neck, her face buried in his fur. She was safe. The sight broke Tom. The wall of fear and anger he had built around his heart crumbled into dust. He fell to his knees before them, his own sobs choking him. He didn't just see his daughter. He saw the entire, terrible truth in a single, devastating flash. He saw the loyalty of the dog he had condemned, the hero he had imprisoned. "Oh, Barney," he wept, reaching out a trembling hand, not for his daughter, but for the dog. "What have we done? I'm so sorry." The journey back was a silent, solemn procession. Lily refused to be carried by anyone. She walked with one hand in her father's and the other clutching a fistful of Barney's fur, her guardian never leaving her side. When they arrived home, Sarah flew out the door, her face a mess of tears. She saw Lily, safe, and then she saw Barney, walking beside her, not as a prisoner, but as a triumphant knight. The family was reunited, the broken pieces tentatively placed back together. The next morning, the house was quiet, but with a new, peaceful stillness. Barney was not in his kennel. He was lying on the living room rug, his rightful throne, with Lily curled up beside him, her head resting on his side, fast asleep. Sarah and Tom watched them, their hearts aching with a mixture of profound gratitude and crushing guilt. It was then that the doorbell rang. It was their next-door neighbor, a woman named Carol, and her young son, a boy named Leo who often played near their fence. Carol looked nervous. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but Leo, he saw what happened yesterday. With the news about Lily being missing, he couldn't sleep. He told me something I think you need to know." She nudged her son forward. Leo, a shy boy of 10, looked at the floor. "It wasn't him," he mumbled, pointing a small finger at Barney. "It wasn't the yellow dog." Tom and Sarah exchanged a confused look. "What do you mean, Leo?" Tom asked gently. "I saw it," he said, his voice a little stronger. "I was in my window. There was another dog, a skinny, mean-looking one. It was by the fence. Lily tried to pet it, and it bit her. And then he said, his eyes wide with awe as he looked at Barney, he roared and scared the mean dog away. He saved her."
The simple, unadorned truth of a child's testimony landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. Sarah let out a strangled sob and covered her mouth with her hand. Tom sank into a chair, the full weight of their catastrophic mistake crashing down on him. It wasn't just that they had been wrong, it was that they had punished a hero. They had exiled the very creature who had saved their daughter, not once, but twice. Tom slid to the floor and crawled over to the sleeping pair. He gently stroked Barney's head, his tears falling freely onto the dog's golden fur. "You saved her," he whispered, his voice thick with a guilt so profound it was a physical pain. "You saved her, and we punished you for it. Can you ever forgive us?" Barney, awakened by the touch, simply lifted his head, licked the tears from Tom's cheek, and then rested his head back on his paws, his eyes fixed on the sleeping girl beside him. His forgiveness was as simple and absolute as his love. His job was to be the guardian, and now, finally, his family understood.
The kennel in the backyard was dismantled the very next day, its chain-link fence rolled up and discarded like the ugly mistake it was. Barney was reinstated not just as a pet, but as the acknowledged, revered heart of the Miller family. He was their silent guardian, the hero who had faced injustice with a quiet dignity and whose loyalty had never, for a single moment, wavered. Lily, with her anchor restored, began to flourish again, the storms in her mind calmed by the steady, loving presence of her best friend. The story of Barney and Lily is a powerful lesson in the nature of truth and trust. It reminds us that what we see is not always the whole story, and that fear can be a blindfold, causing us to betray the very ones who are trying to protect us. It's a testament to the profound, unbreakable bonds that exist beyond the reach of words, and a tribute to the silent, unwavering loyalty of a guardian who asks for nothing in return but the safety of his pack. Thank you for joining us on another journey here at the Silent Chord. We believe that every animal has a story, and that in listening to them, we learn more about ourselves. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing your own thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed an act of animal loyalty that defied explanation? We would be honored to hear your story. There are always more chords to be struck, more silent heroes to celebrate. We'll see you in the next one.